The distant reaches of the Orion sector were always a place of mystery, a vast expanse of space untouched by most. But for the Varelians, it was a place to search, to mine, and to explore. Their mining vessel, Sapphire Voyager, had been out on a routine mission, one of many that ventured beyond known space to find resources in the galaxy's most remote regions. This time, however, something far more significant was waiting for them. It began as a faint signal, something the ship's sensors caught only because of their routine scanning. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a glitch in the system or a disturbance from nearby stars. But the ship's chief engineer, Cora, was not one to ignore even the smallest anomaly. She had seen too many strange things on their journeys to let it pass. It wasn't long before she called the captain to the bridge. "Captain, you might want to take a look at this," she said, her voice tense as she watched the readings. The captain, Vrel, a seasoned leader who had commanded the Sapphire Voyager through countless mining expeditions, stepped forward, glancing at the display. The signal was faint, but it was coming from a location deep within a dense nebula, a place few ships dared to venture due to the dangers hidden within its gaseous clouds. Yet, the signal wasn't random. It was deliberate, almost like a message. "Is it a distress signal?" Vrel asked, his eyes narrowing. "No," Cora replied. "It's too structured. It's not some random interference. It's purposeful, but I can't make sense of it." The crew was uneasy. A signal coming from that nebula could mean anything, from a derelict ship to something far worse. But the Varelians were used to danger. With little hesitation, Vrel ordered the crew to plot a course toward the nebula. As the Sapphire Voyager slowly edged closer, the tension aboard the ship mounted. The nebula loomed ahead, swirling clouds of gas and dust concealing what lay within. The ship's sensors struggled to get a clear read on the surroundings. It was as if something was deliberately hiding itself, blocking any kind of clear scan. As they neared the source of the signal, the crew began to feel the weight of uncertainty pressing on them. Cora's hands shook slightly as she worked the controls. The moment felt wrong, and everyone aboard knew it. "I've never seen anything like this," Cora said, her voice barely above a whisper. The ship's hull shuddered as they entered the dense part of the nebula. The signal grew stronger, clearer, and then it stopped. For a long moment, the bridge fell silent, the crew staring at the readings on the monitors, unsure of what to do next. And then it happened. A shape began to form out of the nebula's swirling clouds, something massive, hidden from sight until now. At first, it looked like just another asteroid, a chunk of space rock, but as the Sapphire Voyager drew closer, the shape grew clearer. It wasn't an asteroid at all. It was a fleet of ships, ancient, long abandoned. The scale of the discovery was staggering. There were dozens of them, all perfectly aligned, their massive hulls covered in strange markings, their shapes unlike anything the Varelians had seen before. The ships were relics, silent, dormant, and forgotten by time. "Is that a fleet?" Cora's voice trembled, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen in disbelief. Vrel leaned forward, his mind racing. The signal had led them here, but what were these ships? And why had they been hidden for so long? He knew there was only one course of action. Send a transmission to the Union. "We found something." Within moments, the Varelian Union received the news. A fleet of unknown origin, hidden for centuries, had been discovered. But the bigger question loomed: who had built them? The markings on the hulls were unlike anything any of the galactic species had ever encountered. For a moment, the Union hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Then came the order: bring the fleet into a nearby research station. The Sapphire Voyager docked with the largest of the ships. As the crew stepped onto the cold, metal surface, a strange, unsettling silence filled the air. The ships were perfectly intact, their technology advanced but aged beyond recognition. There was no sign of life, no crew, no damage. It was as if they had been waiting, waiting for someone to find them. Cora and Vrel led the way into the heart of the largest ship. The corridors were vast, echoing with their every step. The walls were adorned with alien symbols that seemed to pulse faintly, as if they recognized the presence of the Varelians. The air was thick, and the lights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows down the corridors. "It's like it's alive," Cora whispered, her hand brushing against the wall. The symbols reacted to her touch, glowing briefly before fading away. Vrel was already moving ahead, his mind racing with possibilities. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the mystery of this ancient fleet. The ships were older than any known species, yet they were far beyond the capabilities of any civilization alive today. "This place doesn't belong to any of us," Vrel muttered to himself, stepping into the control room. Inside, the room was lined with complex control panels, each one inscribed with the same strange symbols. At the center of the room was a console, and as Vrel approached, the air seemed to crackle with energy. Without thinking, he placed his hand on the panel. The moment his hand made contact, the entire ship came to life. Lights flared, the console hummed with power, and the walls around them seemed to shift. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the room, speaking a language no one could understand. The words, however, had a strange power, an ancient command that resonated deep within the ship's core. Vrel's heart raced. This was it. The fleet was not only alive, it was ready for something. But what? The voice repeated its message, and then, as quickly as it had begun, the ship fell silent again. Cora turned to Vrel, her face pale. What just happened?" Vrel didn't answer. His mind was already reeling with the possibilities. This was not just a discovery. This was a warning, a message from the past, a fleet waiting for something, or perhaps someone, to command it. And now, the galaxy had no choice but to answer the call. As the Sapphire Voyager left the dark nebula and headed back toward Union space, the crew knew that they had unearthed something far more powerful than anyone had imagined. And the questions that followed would haunt them forever. Who had built this fleet? Why had they hidden it? And most importantly, what would happen when the ships were finally awakened? The galaxy would soon learn that the humans who had once ruled this fleet were far more than legends. The ancient power of the human fleet was not forgotten. It was only waiting to be discovered. And now, it was waiting for its next command. The moment the crew of the Sapphire Voyager stepped off their ship and onto the ancient human warship, a sense of foreboding filled the air. The ship was massive, its dark, metallic hull towering over them, its silent presence casting an eerie shadow. Even the brightest lights aboard the Voyager seemed dim in comparison to the shadow of the colossal warship. The markings on the walls of the corridor they'd walked through were unlike anything the Varelians had ever seen, with symbols so intricate they seemed to shift in the light, almost as if they were alive. Cora, the chief engineer, couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was watching them, waiting for something. They had been inside the warship for hours now, carefully exploring, scanning, and analyzing every corner. And still, no one had found a single hint about its purpose or origin. Vrel, the captain, was the first to realize that the ship had to be more than just a relic. "This ship is not just old," he muttered under his breath as he paced across the command deck. "It's alive, in a way we don't understand." Cora, who had been inspecting the control panels, turned to him. "You think the ship's AI is still functional?" Her voice was quiet, as though speaking louder would disturb the ancient ship's silence. "I don't know," Vrel replied, his brow furrowed in thought. "But something here is waiting." He gestured to the darkened control room, where strange symbols flickered across the walls in a rhythmic pattern. "We've only scratched the surface." The rest of the crew looked around, nervously glancing at each other. The feeling that they were being watched never left. They had barely touched any of the ship's controls, unsure whether the ship would respond or whether it might awaken something dangerous. After what felt like an eternity of silent exploration, Vrel made a decision. "We need to try it," he said, stepping toward the central console. The crew followed closely, unsure of what they were about to unleash. The console was unlike any technology they had encountered. It was smooth, almost organic looking, with glowing symbols that pulsed with an energy that didn't seem to belong to any species known to the galactic community. The buttons and levers were embedded into the surface, sleek and unyielding, but there was a certain order to them, a structure that felt too familiar. The more Vrel looked at it, the more he felt like it was calling to him. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" Cora asked, her voice edged with hesitation. "We have no idea what it will do." Vrel hesitated, but only for a moment. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. If the ship was still operational, there was no telling what kind of power it might hold. "We need answers," he said, placing his hand on the console. The symbols on the walls flickered and brightened, and for the first time, a faint hum filled the room, growing louder with each passing second. The moment his fingers made contact with the surface, a surge of energy coursed through the ship, and the once dormant warship began to stir. Lights flickered on across the command deck, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to shift and move. The walls vibrated softly as the ship's systems slowly powered up, one by one. The hum grew louder, and the air around them seemed to grow thick with tension. Suddenly, a voice filled the room. It was deep and mechanical, and though the language was unrecognizable, there was no mistaking the tone of command that echoed through the metal walls. Cora's heart raced as the words reverberated in her chest. The air felt charged, as if something ancient and powerful had just awakened. She instinctively stepped back, her eyes wide with disbelief. Vrel stood still, unable to look away from the console. His hand remained pressed against the surface, and the ship's systems seemed to respond to his touch. The symbols on the wall flashed rapidly, as if communicating with the console. The ship was no longer just a relic. It was alive, and it was listening. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. What had they just activated? The ship's eye, a weapon, or something else entirely? Cora's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. "We need to shut it down," one of the crew members, Levin, said, his voice tense. "We don't know what it's doing." But Vrel didn't move. His gaze was locked onto the console, his mind absorbed in the strange, alien patterns forming before him. He could feel the ship connecting with him, recognizing his presence as its captain. The ship was waiting for a command, but it wasn't clear who or what it would obey. The voice, now louder, repeated its command in the same unrecognizable language. This time, however, Cora noticed something. The symbols on the walls shifted in sync with the words, almost as if they were responding to the ship's voice. There was a pattern to the language, a kind of rhythm that seemed familiar. "The AI. It's trying to communicate," Cora whispered, stepping closer to the console. Her fingers hovered just above the surface. She wasn't sure if it was safe to interact with it, but something told her that they had to try. Vrel finally pulled his hand away from the console, but the ship continued to hum and vibrate around them. The words echoed in their ears, louder and more insistent. Something was happening. Something big. "I don't know if we should be doing this," Cora said again, her voice trembling. "What if it's a weapon? Or worse, what if it's controlling us?" "We're already inside," Vrel replied, his voice grim. "Whatever happens now, we have no choice but to see it through." As the ship continued to power up, a new display appeared on the central console, a map of the galaxy. It was different from anything they had seen before, showing star systems and regions they didn't recognize. The map highlighted specific areas that seemed to be marked for some kind of operation. Cora gasped. "It's not just awake, it's making a plan." The ship's AI had a purpose, and now it was communicating its intentions to the crew. The ship was alive in ways they had never imagined, connected to something much larger than themselves. The Varelians had stumbled upon something powerful, something they were not ready for. Suddenly, A massive sound filled the room, deep, mechanical, and bone-rattling. The floor shook beneath their feet as the ship's engines began to hum. The map on the console zoomed in on a star system, and the symbols that had been flashing rapidly now glowed in steady, rhythmic patterns. Cora stepped back, her eyes wide with realization. It's setting a course for war. The ship wasn't just a weapon. It was a fleet that had been lying dormant for eons, waiting for the right moment to return to action. The warship had a purpose, and it had just been activated. "We've made a terrible mistake," Cora whispered, her voice filled with dread. But it was too late. The ship's command was clear. There was no stopping it now. The ancient warship had awoken, and its mission was set in motion. As the crew watched in stunned silence, the first activation of the ship became the beginning of something far greater, something that would change the galaxy forever. Whatever came next, they were no longer in control. The ship was. The galaxy had been at peace for generations, the long scars of war fading into memory. The ancient fleets that once ruled the stars were thought to be no more than myths. But deep in the dark corners of space, an unknown threat had begun to stir. The Aegis Station, the last line of defense in the Outer Rim, had been receiving strange signals for weeks now, signals that none of their equipment could decode. Captain Darnell, commander of the station, stood at the window, staring out into the vast, empty void. His crew had already reported numerous strange anomalies, ships vanishing without a trace, planets going silent, and then, most chilling of all, the sudden appearance of an unknown fleet, a fleet that should not exist. "Sir," Lieutenant Zora's voice broke through his thoughts, tense and urgent. She was standing by the communications console, her face pale, her hands trembling. "We've received a transmission. It's from them." The words hit Captain Darnell like a punch to the gut. Them, the enemies they had fought decades ago, those that had almost wiped out humanity and its allies. The enigmatic, ruthless Vroth, a species that had vanished after their defeat, leaving nothing but fear in their wake. No one knew where they had gone, and many believed they had simply disappeared into the depths of the universe, never to return. But now, it seemed, the Vroth were back. And this time, they weren't coming to negotiate. Darnell turned to Zora, his face hardening with resolve. "Put it through," he said, his voice steady, though his insides churned with uncertainty. As Zora pressed a button, a crackling image appeared on the screen. The figure was tall, its features obscured by shadows, but the voice that came through was unmistakable, cold, calculating, and full of disdain. "We have returned," the voice said, reverberating with power. "And this time, your defenses will be meaningless. Prepare for your extinction." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only the eerie silence in its wake. Darnell could feel the weight of the words pressing on him. The Vroth had not just returned. They had come with a plan that would bring the galaxy to its knees. "Captain," Zora whispered, looking at the coordinates flashing on the screen. "Their fleet is moving toward the core. If they reach the central systems—" "I know," Darnell interrupted, his voice grim. "They won't stop until every system falls." The station's alarms blared as the lights flickered. It was no longer just a warning. It was reality. The Vroth were coming, and they were bringing death with them. Darnell turned to his crew, his voice now commanding. "Prepare the station's defenses. Get the fleet ready. We don't have much time." For hours, the Aegis station worked tirelessly to ready itself. The crew scrambled to repair systems, deploy weapons, and send out distress signals to nearby fleets. But as the hours passed, the threat of the Vroth grew closer, and the sense of doom tightened its grip on the station. No one had forgotten the tales of the last Vroth invasion. Their weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had seen, and their ships, sleek, dark, and unstoppable, had torn through defenses as if they were made of paper. By the time the enemy fleet entered the system, the Aegis was as ready as it would ever be. Darnell stood at the command center, his hands clenched into fists. The fleet was massive, larger than anything they had seen before, and it was only growing. The Vroth weren't just attacking, they were staging a full-scale invasion. "All ships, prepare for battle," Darnell commanded, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We hold the line here, or we lose everything." As the first wave of Vroth ships descended on the station, the battle began. Laser fire lit up the dark sky, and explosions rocked the space around them. The station's weapon systems fired relentlessly, but the enemy ships were relentless too. Each shot that hit the Vroth ships seemed to do little more than scratch their surface. Their hulls were reinforced with materials far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. The Aegis was holding, but just barely. "Captain, they're pushing us back," Zora called out, her voice tight with panic. "Our defenses won't hold much longer." Darnell didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the screen as it displayed the battle's progress. They were being overwhelmed. The Vroth were too powerful, but he refused to give in. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. Suddenly, a series of explosions erupted from the outer hull, and the station shook violently. The shields had been breached. Darnell's heart skipped a beat as he turned to face his crew. "Get to the escape pods. Now." The crew scrambled, but Darnell stayed in place. His mind raced. There had to be something they were missing. They couldn't let the Vroth win. Not like this. There had to be a way to stop them. And then it hit him. A memory from the last war. A technology buried deep within the Aegis. A weapon that had never been activated. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. "Zara," Darnell called, his voice sharp. "Where's the emergency override for the ancient weapon system?" Zara's eyes widened in realization, but there was no time to explain. "In the lower decks, Captain. But we'll never make it. The station's already—" "I'm going," Darnell interrupted. "Stay here and hold the line. I'll activate it." Before she could protest, he ran toward the hatch leading to the lower decks. His heart pounded in his chest as he passed through the station's corridors, the walls shaking with every impact. The Vroth were relentless, and the station was rapidly losing power. Time was running out. When Darnell finally reached the control room for the weapon system, he could barely stand. The room was in chaos. Wires sparked, and the lights flickered. But in the center of the room stood the weapon, a massive cannon, ancient and covered in dust, its technology incomprehensible. It was humanity's last hope. With trembling hands, Darnell activated the system, and the weapon roared to life. A brilliant beam of energy shot out from the cannon, blasting through space toward the incoming Vroth fleet. For a moment, the battle stopped. The Vroth ships recoiled in shock. And then they retaliated, launching wave after wave of attack. But the weapon had done its job. The first wave of enemy ships was destroyed in a blinding explosion. Darnell didn't know if the weapon would hold. But in that moment, it was enough. The Vroth had felt the power of humanity's last stand. The battle was far from over, but the message had been sent. The enemy was not invincible. As the Aegis station shuddered once more, Darnell allowed himself one last look at the screen. The Vroth were retreating, at least for now, but he knew this was only the beginning. The enemy had returned, and the war was far from over. The storm had been brewing for centuries, hidden deep within the heart of the galaxy. No one had realized how close they were to the awakening, until it was almost too late. The crew of the Endurance, a deep space exploration vessel, had been on a routine mission to chart unknown regions of space when they stumbled upon it. Captain Elise Carter stood at the observation window of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the dark, swirling cloud ahead. It wasn't just any cloud. It was something far worse, something no one had ever seen before. A storm, but not a natural one. A man-made force, a weapon that could reshape the galaxy. "Captain," Lieutenant Tomlinson's voice cut through her thoughts. "We've detected a massive energy surge in the center of that storm. It's It's unlike anything we've encountered before. It's coming from inside. Elise turned to him, her brow furrowing in confusion. A weapon? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew the answer. Whatever it wasn't just a storm. It was a signal, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. Could it be a trap? Lieutenant Zara, her tactical officer, asked from across the room. She was standing by the weapons console, her fingers hovering over the controls, ready for anything. I don't know, but we're not turning back, Elise replied. Prepare for full scans. I want to know what we're dealing with before we get any closer. The Endurance slowly crept toward the center of the storm, the hum of the engines vibrating through the ship. The storm seemed to grow larger with every passing moment. The lightning flashing in unnatural patterns, the clouds swirling as if alive. The crew could feel the tension in the air. Something was wrong, but none of them could explain it. As they ventured deeper into the storm, the ship began to shake, the sensors going haywire. There were no signs of life, no visible enemy ships, but the atmosphere itself felt oppressive. The storm wasn't just a physical force. It was a presence, an intelligence that seemed to be watching them. Captain, we've reached the epicenter, Tomlinson reported, his voice laced with unease. The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's here, it's powerful. It's alive. Elisa's heart raced as she stared at the data on the screen. She had seen many things in her career, but nothing like this. The storm wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was the product of ancient technology, a weapon that could obliterate entire fleets in seconds. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the weapon itself. It was the fact that they had awakened it. The Endurance wasn't the first to stumble upon it, and it wouldn't be the last. The storm had been dormant for millennia, but something had triggered it, and now there was no going back. Before she could say another word, the ship's alarms blared. The monitors flickered, and the lights dimmed. Captain, we've lost all communication with the outside world, Zara said, her voice frantic. The storm is blocking our transmissions. We're cut off. Get us out of here, now, Elise ordered, but it was too late. The storm seemed to sense their fear, and it began to respond. The clouds above the Endurance grew darker, the lightning more erratic, and the temperature in the ship's corridors dropped rapidly. Something was closing in on them. They weren't alone. The first attack came without warning. A massive shockwave slammed into the ship, throwing everyone off their feet. The Endurance groaned under the pressure, the metal creaking as if it were about to break apart. Elise gripped the command console, trying to steady herself. Damage report, she barked. Shields are holding, but they're weakening, Tomlinson said. Hull integrity is at 70%. We need to move, or we'll be torn apart. The storm was no longer just an obstacle. It was a living force, a predator hunting them down. Elise's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. They couldn't outrun it, and they couldn't fight it. The storm was too powerful, its energy unfathomable. But there had to be a way to stop it, a way to deactivate the weapon before it consumed them all. We need to find the source of the energy surge, Elise said, determination setting into her voice. There's got to be a control center, a way to shut it down. Zara nodded, her face grim. But where do we start? We don't even know what we're dealing with. Elise, Tomlinson said, his voice quiet. There's a strange reading coming from the center of the storm. It's not human. What do you mean, not human? Elise asked, her voice tight with fear. I mean it's alien. The source of the energy isn't from any known species. It's something older, something forgotten, he explained. Before Elise could respond, another shockwave slammed into the ship, this one even more powerful than the last. The entire bridge shuddered, and the lights flickered out completely. For a moment, everything was pitch black. Then, the emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The storm had gained full control. They were trapped. We need to get to the central core, Elise said, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the storm outside. Tomlinson, Zara, with me. We're going down there. Now. The three of them rushed through the darkened corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was thick with tension, the sense of impending doom growing stronger with every step. They had to find the heart of the storm, the place where the energy was being channeled. If they didn't, they would never escape. As they reached the central core, they saw it, an enormous glowing device, ancient and pulsing with dark energy. The storm was feeding directly from it, using its power to maintain its grip on the Endurance. Elise could feel the storm's presence all around them, like a living creature, watching, waiting for them to make a move. It was too late to stop it. "Captain," Zara whispered. "What now?" Elise took a deep breath. The storm was awake, and there was only one way to stop it. The weapon had to be deactivated, but it would take all their energy to do so. One wrong move, and they would all be lost. "We'll have to risk it," Elise said. "We're activating the core's failsafe. It's the only chance we have." With trembling hands, she approached the control panel. Every instinct in her told her to turn back, but she couldn't. The crew, her people, were counting on her. With a final glance at her team, Elise pressed the button. The storm seemed to roar in fury as the core began to power down. The energy surges began to subside, and the lightning outside slowed. But the storm wasn't finished yet. The battle was far from over. They had awakened something ancient, something dangerous, and now they had to fight to survive. Captain Elise Carter stood at the observation window of the Endurance, gazing out into the vast emptiness of space. Her ship had been on a routine mission to map uncharted territories, but what they had discovered was anything but ordinary. Ahead of them, a storm churned, but it wasn't like any storm she had ever seen before. It was massive, dark, and pulsing with an unnatural energy that seemed to stretch across the stars. It was more than just a storm. It was a warning, or perhaps a signal. The sensors had started malfunctioning the moment they approached it, the readings flashing erratically, showing energy spikes they couldn't understand. "Captain," Lieutenant Tomlinson's voice crackled through the comms, "we've detected an unusual power surge emanating from the heart of that storm. It's off the charts." "Is it a natural phenomenon?" Elise asked, her voice calm, but her mind racing. The storm didn't feel natural. Nothing about it did. "We don't think so, Captain. We're picking up strange energy signatures. They're not human, not any species we've encountered." Elise's heart skipped a beat. She had seen many strange things in her years of service, but this was something else entirely. "Keep me informed. I want to know everything about it." As the Endurance moved closer to the storm's epicenter, the tension on the ship grew. The crew could feel it, a presence in the storm, watching them. Something ancient, something waiting. The energy surged again, brighter this time, as though the storm itself was aware of their approach. Elise couldn't shake the feeling that they had just awakened something from its slumber. "We need to turn back, Captain," Lieutenant Zara, the tactical officer, said. Her voice was tense, her hands hovering over the weapon's console, as if ready to react at a moment's notice. "We don't know what this is. It could be a trap." Elise didn't respond right away. Her eyes were locked on the swirling darkness ahead, her mind processing the possibilities. If it was a trap, turning back might not save them. No, they needed to understand what they were up against. "No, we're moving forward. We need to know what this is." The Endurance crept closer to the storm. Every moment felt like an eternity. The storm seemed to shift in response to their approach, as if it were alive, reacting to their presence. The stars around them disappeared behind the swirling clouds, the ship enveloped in darkness. Elise could feel the pressure in the air, heavy, suffocating. The ship's systems flickered, and a low hum began to fill the air, growing louder with each passing second. The storm was changing. The storm was awakening. "Captain," Tomlinson's voice trembled. The ship's systems are starting to go offline. We're losing power. Elisa's heart raced. Shut everything down except the emergency systems. Zara, get to the weapons console. If anything tries to come at us, we need to be ready. But it was too late. The storm reacted violently. A powerful shockwave slammed into the Endurance, knocking the crew off their feet. The ship groaned under the force, metal screeching, as if it were being torn apart. Alarms blared throughout the ship. The lights flickered and went out, leaving only the emergency lighting, casting long, haunting shadows along the walls. "We're being pulled in," Zora shouted. "The storm, it's using some kind of gravitational force to drag us deeper." Elise gripped the railing, steadying herself. She could hear the panic in her crew's voices, but she couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. They had to survive, they had to fight back. But how? What could they do against a force like this? They had no weapons that could affect it, no shield strong enough to withstand it. "Get us to the control room," Elise ordered. "We need to understand this." Tomlinson, Zara, with me. The three of them made their way through the shaking corridors of the Endurance, the sounds of the storm growing louder, filling the air with an oppressive energy. As they approached the control room, the ship seemed to lurch again, throwing them into the walls. It was all Elise could do to keep her footing as she scrambled forward. They had to reach the source of this storm, the heart of whatever power was awakening inside it. In the control room, the holographic displays flickered wildly, showing erratic energy spikes and distorted images. One image stood out, an ancient alien ship, floating in the center of the storm, hidden beneath the chaos. A ship unlike anything the humans had ever seen before. It was covered in symbols they couldn't understand, its design completely foreign. This was it. This was the source. "Captain," Tomlinson said, his voice shaky. "That ship, it's the cause of the storm. It's been dormant for centuries, but something has activated it." Zara stepped forward, eyes wide. "But who activated it? What happened?" "That's what we need to find out," Elise said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "We need to get closer. We need to disable whatever mechanism is causing this." The three of them returned to the ship's bridge, and Elise looked out the observation window. The alien ship loomed ahead, its energy surging with terrifying power. The storm was no longer a natural phenomenon. It was a weapon, and they were trapped in its grasp. "I'm sending a team to the ship," Elise said, turning to her crew. "We need to board it, find out what's inside, and shut it down." Zara raised an eyebrow. "Captain, are you sure about this? It could be a trap. We don't know what's inside that thing." Elise nodded. "I know, but we have no other choice. We either stop it or we all die." With a sense of urgency, the crew prepared for the boarding operation. They loaded up with weapons, equipment, and anything else they might need. But as the shuttle left the Endurance and moved toward the alien ship, they felt the storm's power intensifying. It was as if the ship itself were aware of their approach, as if it were anticipating their every move. As they docked with the alien vessel, the crew stepped out into the dark, eerie corridors of the ship. The air inside was cold, metallic. Strange symbols adorned the walls, glowing faintly. Elise couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking through the tomb of an ancient civilization, one that had long since vanished. And yet, the ship felt alive, its energy pulsing with every step they took. They found the central control room deep within the vessel. There, a glowing interface pulsed with power. Elise approached it, her heart racing, as she tried to understand the controls. She had no idea what they were doing, but she knew one thing. If they didn't act fast, the storm would consume everything. With one final glance at her crew, Elise initiated the shutdown sequence. The ship groaned, and the storm outside began to dissipate, the energy weakening. But they weren't out of danger yet. The storm had been awakened, and now they had to survive the consequences of their actions. The galaxy was forever changed.